All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a chance to enjoy popsicle. The last I heard, we still had some boxes of popsicles, so maybe check in on the way out so you don't leave empty-handed. Our final session today is about evolving our practice. In this panel format, you'll hear stories from practitioners leading equitable climate adaptation, followed by a facilitated panel discussion about paradoxical challenges and emerging possibilities they encounter in their work. Unlike our previous sessions, we're going to hold questions between each of the presentations until after all have finished. There'll be a moderated panel and I think some opportunity to ask at that time. You all should still have your index cards or note cards, and if you don't, there may be some in the pocket in the seat at the end of the aisles there. Please feel free to use those to jot down your questions as the presentations happen. That way you can remember those when we do have that opportunity. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Our first panelist, Julie Wormser, is the Mystic River Watershed Association's Senior Policy Advisor and co-founder of the Resilience Mystic Collaborative. Julie is offering a glimmer of hope for us today. What a lovely thing. And we'll share how Boston area communities are successfully working together to bring more beauty, safety, and fairness to people and places most at risk from extreme weather. Please welcome Julie Wormser.
Thank you so much. I am really honored to be here. I mean, I know from the conversation today, a lot of you are like me and you're probably feeling pretty fried from all that's going on around us and what we've been going through, whether it's COVID or political strife and whether it's in our personal lives. It's tiring. It's a tiring moment in life to be, even before we start to think about climate. So this talk is not just about the work we're doing with the Resilient Mystic Collaborative, but it's a little bit extra. Oops. I want to start with a quote from public philosopher Dr. Cornel West, who makes a distinction between hope and optimism. I don't know why I lost my slide, but anyway, I lost a moment, but darn it, I haven't memorized it. But basically he says the difference between hope and optimism is whether there's data involved. Optimism is based on data and hope is really how you live your life. You know, it's like love as a verb, hope as a verb. But he goes on to say, it's no accident then that hope and despair go hand in hand. Hope is a wrestling with the despair over and over again, but never allowing despair to have the last word, to dampen your fire, to sustain your hope in your quest for truth, goodness, beauty, and maybe the holy. So hope is something that you do, that you act on, and then maybe you feel. But we are living through such hard times. Maybe you lost someone or your own health during COVID. Maybe you can barely afford to live in your hometown. Maybe you're struggling with just how awful people can treat one another. But then there's the existential threat of climate change with Hampton flooding 5 times a year. It's so hot that kids can't finish the school year. We had 11 inches of rain in Leominster, Massachusetts in 5 hours last year. But I'll tell you where I get hope these days. I want to introduce you to the Resilient Mystic Collaborative. So the Mystic River's name, there's 2 of them, one in Connecticut, we're the one near Boston. It's an anglicized version of a Massachusetts nation word for estuary, because this was once a tidal river. The entire watershed is about the size of Brooklyn, New York, chopped up into 21 cities and towns, each with their own budgets, governments, zoning, rivalries, and aspirations. We also host the highest concentration of critical infrastructure and environmental justice communities between New York City and the North Pole. We have no county government to help us work together on regional challenges. So 6 years ago, our executive director and I asked 50 local thought leaders 2 questions. What climate challenges do you have that you can't deal with within your municipal boundaries? And how could we as a high trust collaborative nonprofit help. These thought leaders had great answers. Basically, we want to do stuff on the ground. Don't worry about planning and education. We want projects that make us safer. And we have no staff to work across boundaries, might as well be dragons. So could you hold this space to facilitate us to do regional work? So the Resilient Mystic Collaborative launched in September 2018. The members are predominantly senior municipal staff with experts from environmental justice, public health, and land use backgrounds. And they came up with what's been a very successful playbook. We start with watershed-wide data to understand the highest risks to people and resources from extreme weather. And we're especially focused on closing the gap between low-income residents of color and workers of color and people who have the resources to stay out of harm's way. We work with community members to design solutions, and then we raise the funds to put those solutions in place. Since we started in 2018, and really only mostly in the last 2 years, we've raised over $130 million in grants and hope to triple our work within the next decade for beautiful, effective projects that protect people from harm and make our communities more fair and beautiful. I want to show you what this looks like on the ground. So this is what the Mystic River looks like. We're pretty urban. You know, this is just a Google aerial view a few years ago. And this is what it looked like when my mom was born, and she's luckily still with us. But look how much room people gave the river to run. But then in the 1960s, we built the Amelia Earhart Dam, which keeps the river's level at mid-tide. Upstream communities responded by developing right into those floodplains, giving us an enormous design challenge as sea level rises. Let's pan back to see more of the Mystic watershed. This is a 1900s USGS drawing of the tidal Mystic River. And all of those light blue areas were salt marshes going all the way up into Cambridge and Medford. When our ancestors filled them in, it took a lot of work and a lot of dirt, and they never contemplated sea level rise. So I want to show you, this is the same data that folks are using elsewhere. This is the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model, but this is the map of our expected flooding 50 years from now, and look how they line up. So those marshes remember where they were. So what do you do with news like that? Remember, this is all of our regional infrastructure that makes Boston, Boston, and you know, there's about over 100,000 people living in those flood areas. So we first have to understand what's at stake. This is a map of the first places that are going to flood when Boston gets hit by its Superstorm Sandy or Hurricane Katrina or the other range of extreme storms that we've seen recently. Several years ago, RMC communities got state funding to partner with both our key infrastructure managers, whether it's our wastewater plant or Logan Airport, and community groups to understand what would break and who would be most harmed if a big honking storm hits Boston Harbor. Alas, we're not getting.
Hi, everyone. I'm meteorologist Eric Fisher. We have a doozy of a winter storm gearing up here. Now, we're still a few days out, so things will likely shift at least a little bit as we get closer over the course of the weekend. But as it stands right now, classic setup for a slow-moving big nor'easter. This one will be swinging for the fences. We'll call it Big Poppy.
All right, so maybe one or two of you heard that. I still can't figure out how to make that work. But this is a real meteorologist, Eric Fisher. He's a CBS meteorologist in Boston. But nor'easter Big Poppy was not a real storm. So we ran an emergency scenario of a 2050 nor'easter when we would get flooding 2.5 feet above what we've ever gotten before. What was different about this emergency, it was a emergency exercise, one up from a tabletop exercise, is that all of these different key facilities played at the same time so we could see the cascading effects. So Eversource would say, okay, the grid's down, and the T said, well, we stopped all of a sudden because they're all focused on electricity to have the subways go. And then all of a sudden, all the Priuses caught on fire at Logan Airport, and so we had this storm. And what we found out from playing this exercise over a couple of days via Zoom, because it was the height of COVID, is what would break from a big coastal storm. We then stopped and we asked very low income people, half of whom didn't speak English as their first language, if these public services went down, what would break in your life? And they had very, very different answers. So the infrastructure managers are saying, we need to elevate this dam. We need to make sure that the subway doesn't flood. But the people were saying, we need to keep the schools open so that I can go to work and have somewhere for my kids to go. We need to make sure that our cell phones can be charged and we have self-service, because I don't have laptops or Wi-Fi at home. So we pulled these data points together, and now we have a punch list that we're going through on what do we need to protect first. So for example, and Kyle Johnson here is working on this project. We are this tale of two watersheds, our urban core and our suburban parts. So one of the things we're doing is, we first had this idea of, well, if we could store water upstream, maybe we would flood less in our urban areas. Well, water kind of goes straight down these days. So that's not working as well as our first theory of change was. So we then shifted to, how do we prevent flood harm from the flooding we can't prevent? So now we're looking at those public services throughout the watershed that we call priority populations as opposed to vulnerable populations, because who really wants to be called a vulnerable population? But the priority populations are the folks who are most at risk from extreme weather exposure. So we're looking at preventing harm to public services. The next piece we looked at was, where are the hottest areas in our watershed? And we had community scientists go all over the watershed on car transects or bike transects during a heat wave in 2021. And we both saw, where is the relative heat and humidity and air quality in terms of particulate matter, and overlaid those with, where are our lowest income environmental justice communities, which is the hashtags. And now we're doing Wicked Cool Mystic, which is doing deep community engagement on outdoor cooling solutions that people are designing themselves that they will use to stay within safe temperatures. And the third thing we're doing is looking at how can we block some of those low-lying areas to cost effectively prevent inland coastal flooding of both our people and infrastructure. And the purple is areas that continue to flood when our sea level plus storm surge plus whatever flooding from whatever reason is 5 feet higher than it is today. And the teal part is, if we are successful in what we're doing today, that's all the avoided flooding. That's our project right now. And that's where we've raised $90 million to move this forward, elevating a couple of dams and elevating shorelines. And in the meantime, creating some living shorelines and bike paths, etc. We're not doing everything, but we're doing a lot. And so now we do a lot of lobbying and fundraising to secure the resources to design and build these projects. And this is what our first almost $130 million in grants looks like. It's almost boring, but it's not boring. It took a lot longer to write the proposals. I just want to put that out. So, right? Yeah. And we never forget the cake. So this is a lot of success for a voluntary partnership, but if our water and sewer were managed by a small nonprofit with no regulatory powers or dedicated funding, much less heavy machinery to build and fix things, you would call it a fail. We're a pilot project. Climate resilience at scale needs to be a core government function paid for by taxes, not gimmicks or borrowing. So I want to go back to hope. Honestly, I am really, really proud of the work we're doing, but hope is a head game that cannot be dependent on success. I'll tell you what's helping me these days, and I say this as a pretty secular person. It's from a small town preacher in Maine named Rob McCall, who passed away earlier this year. He said, if these really are the end times, how do we want to be found by the Creator? Anxious and confused, angry and bitter about faraway events, condemning and judging those around us, wounding further the wounded, scrambling for a ticket to heaven? Or do we want to be found binding up wounds in our own communities, comforting our neighbors who mourn, and freeing those who are captives of pain and fear? I want to leave you with this. We will all get one of these one day. Our whole lives boil down to that little dash. All our fears and aspirations, all our love and despair. We can't control the world around us. We can only control our reactions to it and how we treat one another. Every day, no matter what, I choose hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. As a self-prescribed optimist, it's a great reminder to choose hope every day. I try to do that, and I hope you all will as well. Just a small reflection. That is so impressive, that round of grants, as someone who writes grants, and also to see the scale increase over time, the capacity grants in the $50,000 range up to millions of dollars is just incredibly impressive and very inspiring. Okay. Our second presentation in our panel is one very near and dear to my heart for many reasons, including the honor to work alongside our two speakers. You've heard this project mentioned a number of times today. I feel like we could almost theme the climate summit this year, flood ready neighborhoods. Dr. Alyson Eberhardt works with people and coastal ecosystems in her role as coastal ecosystem specialist and associate extension professor with New Hampshire Sea Grant and UNH Cooperative Extension. And Kirsten Howard is the resilience program coordinator for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Coastal Program, as well as co-chair alongside myself, assisting New Hampshire's 17 coastal communities to plan and prepare for coastal hazards such as sea level rise and storm flooding, providing technical assistance, grant support, as well as serving as a liaison for state policy issues. Alyson and Kirsten are going to share a little bit about the Flood Ready Neighborhoods program that pilots neighborhood scale principled and asset-based approaches to implement resilience actions. Please welcome Dr. Alyson Eberhardt and Kirsten Howard.
Thanks, Abigail. So Kirsten and I are here today on behalf of a larger collaborative. There they are. To talk about the Flood Ready Neighborhoods program, or what we affectionately call FERN. FERN is a work in progress, and we'd like to share our stories of unlearning old approaches and developing new to us ideas about how we take a community-centered approach to planning for resilience. Our stories are about our experiences as FERN support staff. We respect our neighborhood partners' rights to their own stories, so we'll not be speaking to their experiences. Our team recognizes that our individual identities play a role in our work. Each element is a source of privilege and/or a source of hardship. Our identities have created opportunities for connection and have served as sources of bias. It's this last piece where bias is showing up in our work that is a place of ongoing reflection for our team. We'd like to share a tangible example of what this looks like, and we're not quite ready to do that in this space. The specific examples are very personal and can be uncomfortable to share. Instead, I'll share some of the questions that we're using to check in with ourselves, such as, what are our experiences? How have they shaped our perspectives? How have they shaped who we are professionally? Where might bias show up in our work? And how might we challenge this bias?
So Fern takes a neighborhood scale approach to develop and implement resilience actions in coastal New Hampshire. We work intentionally in neighborhoods with diverse income levels and different forms of land tenure. Fern seeks to center community voices, support social capital, and enable self-determined and asset-based responses to coastal hazards. On another project that responds to individual property owners dealing with flooding and erosion, both Alyson and we were working together on this, and we noticed that the people coming to us tended to be shorefront landowners with financial resources and time. The strategies we shared with them often required working with their neighbors. And that's because, as you all know, flooding and erosion does not respect property lines. And we also found that we were showing up as experts and sharing solutions or strategies that could often feel really one-directional. That model of technical assistance didn't quite feel like we were co-developing approaches together with the people who had lived experiences. Fern came out of this realization and is a pilot, as so many of our projects are, that we're learning about today. We're learning as we go about how to try alternative approaches to technical assistance that seek to tackle those three challenges I just mentioned. How to engage with some of the folks who are most likely to be harmed by coastal hazards but have fewer resources and less time. How to work at a scale that matches the challenge, and how to be in deeper trust-based collaborative partnerships with people experiencing these challenges. One of the first things our team did was to develop 8 programmatic principles to guide our work. These include commitments like we respect local knowledge and humanity, and we acknowledge that this work takes time. We engaged with 6 neighborhoods that experience varied flood risks across Portsmouth, Hampton, Exeter, and Seabrook. These neighborhoods include a housing authority community, a neighborhood surrounded by a salt marsh that's at risk, the neighborhood's at risk of road access loss, a 55+ manufactured home community, and a rapidly gentrifying beach neighborhood, as well as 2 neighborhoods which experience chronic high tide flooding. In all of the neighborhoods, much of the work has been about getting to know people and being there if they want to give us a call. After a big flood, when they're working through a tough decision, or just to chat about their families. As relationships have grown through Fern, we've worked with neighbors to plant sacrificial dunes, to put on educational programs for kids, to go on site walks, to map places that they care about, to share flood water quality results, to raise grant funds, and to design stormwater best management practices.
Our team has reflected on our experiences with the Fern program and synthesized our lessons into a framework with the following elements, which will be published in the fall. As you consider these, know that these process elements aren't linear, but are recursive and often co-occurring. This framework is not presented as a roadmap. It was developed specific to the people and the places and the conditions involved. That doesn't mean we don't hope others will consider incorporating these elements into their own work. It simply means that the ideas we present here are meant to be modified according to the specific conditions of any new situation or place in which they're being applied. Kirsten and I will now each share an example of our own learning that touches on a couple of these framework elements.
We identified the neighborhoods that we were going to try to be invited into through a desktop analysis combining physical and social vulnerability. But then the question was really, how do we get invited in? What do we do next? So Lucy Perkins and I took on trying to be invited into a neighborhood where residents will face daily road inundation from sea level rise and already experience flooding from major storms. I started with my very traditional technical assistance techniques. I emailed and I called and I told them, I'm here to help with your flood concerns. And I expected they'd welcome me in and with that, that offer of assistance. And as you can guess, that's really not what happened. In correspondence with town staff, I was told flooding really isn't a priority concern in this neighborhood. They have other challenges that they're dealing with. And when I finally reached a neighborhood resident through Facebook, my couple of attempts to connect, to go and interact were rejected. And so after flailing for a few months, Fern's coach, Kate O'Brien, who we all heard from this morning, suggested that we redefine for ourselves what success would look like in this neighborhood or in this place. Maybe it would be enough just to go and get to know a few people who live in this community. Just show up, be present on a regular basis. Maybe we hang out at a coffee shop or we volunteer at a local food pantry. So that is how Lucy and I found ourselves trading off volunteering at the weekly community center drop-in bingo. We helped set up coffee, snacks, and occasionally and very clumsily, we called bingo numbers when the woman who has been calling numbers for over a decade had to leave early to catch her bus. We went in without any expectations of our conversations leading to flooding or resilience. And for the most part, honestly, they have not. We have met several lovely aging adults, members of the community who we shared stories about our family and health with. We talked bingo strategy. I've learned a lot. And we celebrated their wins. We got to know the Meals on Wheels staff who prepare meals in the kitchen adjacent to bingo at that same time. And we got to know some of the community center staff. And bingo is unfortunately on summer break at the moment, and we miss the people and the conversations. Overall, no traditional coastal resilience outcomes have come from this just try something approach. And that's okay. I've connected with more people on a personal level in this community than I ever would have sitting in front of my desktop analysis or on Facebook. Through this experience, I've learned so much about how trust building work is less technical and more adaptive and flexible. That with communities who may not invite us to partner in or have other priorities filling their plates, that sometimes that means trying something different, going somewhere new, and respectfully showing up in service of the community on their terms, not ours. And making 3 new connections is enough.
And so as we anticipated the ending of our funding for the FERN program, a question on my mind was, when we're out of money, how do we exit the neighborhoods in which we're working? And our answer is, we don't. Honest, committed support doesn't have an end date unless it's determined by the resident. And here's how we came to this. So our team of neighborhood support staff convened for a day-long work session facilitated by Kate with the goal of identifying how we exit from neighborhoods. Our group very quickly came to the consensus that we won't exit unless residents want us to. In our coaching calls with Kate, they would often remind us that this is the work of the hands, the head, and the heart. And to me, this moment of consensus that we won't exit was an illustration of each of us leaning into that. A strictly head answer would surely have had us designing exit strategies. So Kate then prompted us, if we're not exiting, then what is it that we're doing? And I share with you our constellation of ideas of what it is that we are and will be doing in the FERN program. So how do we sustain this work? Well, we're very much figuring it out as we go. But here are a few things that have emerged from our conversations. We understand that what FERN looks like may shift over time based on funding, capacity, staff changes, and resident interests. We commit to leaning into our principle of open and honest communication among staff and with our neighborhood partners about our current capacity. We can continue this work because of our privilege of flexible positions and supportive supervisors who see value in this work. It highlights the importance of positions that are funded with permanent salary to sustain this work as grant resources come and go. When we feel concerned that we're not doing enough, we look to the fractals concept of Adrienne Marie Brown, who tells us that when we invest in deep work, it will spread. Focus your effort a mile deep and an inch wide. Regardless of funding, there is interest in a continued network of support staff with an expansion to include others. And while we don't know what that will look like yet, I would like to share and remind you about the upcoming Evolve Our Practice opportunity. So in the new year, there is an option for COM members to engage in adaptive leadership team coaching with Kate, just like our Fern support staff have been so fortunate to do. And I'll close by expressing our team's sincere gratitude to all the neighbors and other partners that are engaging in this work with us. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Okay,
Finally, though certainly not least, are Jennifer Gilbert and Lisa Wise, two colleagues I also have the privilege of serving alongside in leadership. Jennifer is the Resilience Project Manager at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Coastal Program, providing outreach and technical assistance to state agencies, coastal municipalities, and other interested and affected parties. Lisa Wise is the Climate Adaptation Program Manager with New Hampshire Sea Grant and UNH Cooperative Extension, working with New Hampshire communities to build awareness of and resilience to the impacts of climate change. As I mentioned, both currently serve as co-chairs for CLOT Outreach. We're grateful to have you both. Together, they'll share about the upcoming update to the New Hampshire Coastal Flood Risk Summary. So please welcome Jennifer and Lisa.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to the last presentation. I'm Jennifer and I'm going to be starting the presentation out by giving a brief overview of the Coastal Flood Risk Summary, which includes part 1, the science report, and part 2, the guidance for using scientific projections. But first, I'm curious to hear from all of you. How many of you have heard about or are familiar with one or both of these documents? Oh, look at that. Nice. All right. How many of you have used one or both of these documents in your work? Oh, very nice. All right. Well, I'm going to be probably telling you what you already know. All right. So the science report was published in 2019 and provides a summary of the state of science relevant to coastal flood risk in New Hampshire and includes updated projections of relative sea level rise, coastal storms, groundwater rise, precipitation, and freshwater flooding. The report was developed by a team of scientific advisors from the University of New Hampshire and was reviewed by the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel and an external panel of regional climate experts. The guidance document was published in 2020 and it provides science-based and user-informed guiding principles and a step-by-step approach for incorporating the updated coastal flood risk projections from the science report into various projects. The report was prepared in partnership with the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel, UNH, DES, and underwent a public review and comment period. We do have copies in the back of the room if you haven't grabbed one at registration that you're happy to take. So feel free to take them. And now I'm going to hand it over to Lisa, who's going to provide some more detail on the proposed public outreach and engagement. Oh my gosh. So prepared. All right. Probably want to know more about the update of what we're going to be doing. So we have a state statute that directs DES to supervise updates of the science report at least every 5 years, which we're at that point now. So Lisa and I are leading the effort to coordinate the project. We're now working to bring together members of the scientific and technical advisory panel who will develop the science report update, and the project advisory group who will provide guidance and input throughout the project. So you can see that we recently just started the project in July, and it will go for 2 years, hopefully end in June of 2026. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
All right, thank you, Jen, for that overview. So the fact that the science and guidance has to be updated every 5 years is really a great opportunity for us to think about how we can evolve our practice. For me, I was involved a little bit in the initial iteration of the science and guidance. And so it's a little hard to believe that we're at this 5-year point for the update. But I just wanted to share kind of a couple of examples of how we are starting to think about ways we might kind of adapt and evolve this practice for this iteration. And we'll just note that this is early thinking and would welcome lots of ideas and involvement. So when we think about evolving our practice for the science and the guidance, we can think about both the process and the content for this update. A few aspects related to the process of this update. We're going to start by evaluating the use of the guidance. So I was so happy to see all of those hands go up about how, that you have some awareness of the guidance, you might have used the guidance. And so we would love to learn from your experiences of trying to use that guidance in your own work and learn how it can be better. And we also want to keep in mind, okay, who might not have had access to the guidance or support to use it the first time around, and how can we be strategic in filling those gaps and making sure that this is accessible broadly. So we're also we've allocated some resources through the project to engage with an equity consultant to inform this work, to develop an inclusive engagement plan, again, to think through how we can be getting this resource out there and support people to actually use this guidance to use the latest information. We're also building in resources for video products and translation. We had developed some video products the first time around, really in response to COVID with the, we published this in March 2020 and then immediately pivoted, which is why we still have some copies of the guidance that please take. So we, having a video, thinking about different ways to communicate this information and this resource, we found really valuable. So we're trying to be more proactive this time around. And then again, building in some plans for translation of materials, which we again did not do with the first round. In addition to the process of this update, we want to think about the content in the resulting updated resources. So for the science report, thinking about opportunities to integrate other ways of knowing in addition to the traditional peer-reviewed science. I was really inspired by some of the artwork that's been displayed here today and shared. Trying to be creative and make sure that we're taking kind of a holistic and integrated approach to this summary of the latest science and impacts. In terms of the guidance report, this original version has a suite of guiding principles, one of which is to prioritize equity and justice. And it pointed users to a few resources. But what I really want to think about with this update is how do we support people to put that guiding principle into practice? I think that there's a lot of work that we can do on this front to expand how we're integrating equity and inclusion into this guidance resource. And it's an opportunity for us to be thinking through how we can really operationalize that commitment going forward. So those are just a few initial ideas. Again, we welcome your ideas and input, and we'll be really kind of gearing up for this update in the coming weeks. So thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit about this project that we're undertaking, and happy to chat more with folks.
Okay. I feel so lucky to be able to continue a conversation with you all, and I have a page of questions that then I added on more to when Kate offered more questions. I don't think I'll be able to get to many of them, but thank you for joining us for a couple extra minutes to dive in. I think the way we'll work this together is I might ask 2 or 3 questions and then really open it up to all of you with what's coming to mind from the 3 presentations we just heard, and we'll go from there. We have about 20 minutes together. So I think I want to start, Kirsten, you talked about this is a process of learning and unlearning, and I'm curious for all of you, who are your teachers in this work? I feel lucky that many of my teachers are here today. And I'm curious what's coming up for you all with that question.
I immediately thought of our current team, which is probably sounding like a broken record today, but really it's been a great place for me to learn from colleagues and partners, challenge my own assumptions, work through experiences together. The other teachers that come to mind are my kids. It's a constant daily practice and teaching, and and many other things. So it's just really, I think, improving my own my work as well.
Patience and love, right? Yeah, I will also sound like a broken record next to Lisa. Maybe I'll point folks to a couple of the teachers that we shared that we found really useful in Fern that are shared in the resource packet. So you have some links to access them. Adrienne Murray Brown, who wrote Emergent Strategy, offers some incredible lessons. Veena Patel, who Kate O'Brien turned us onto, offers a statement that we use a lot, which is say the quiet part out loud, which it would take a long time to go into what that really means, but when you're grappling with a challenge as a professional team, maybe bringing the folks with lived experiences or other folks you're working with into that grappling with that challenge explicitly, rather than kind of hiding it from them and then coming to them with a solution. It's kind of something that opened up for me. Max Lee Brown is another. Alyson Eberhardt references their work quite often in terms of the accessible, inclusive practices in academia and elsewhere. So those are three that I'll just point to take a look at your research packets for.
Thank you so much. I think it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So for me, as basically somebody who leads a coalition, holds a space for new ideas, I actually spend quite a bit of time reading speculative fiction, like near future climate fiction, to say, what's the future we're living into and what do we need to do today? Because if I can hold the sense of where we need to go, other people are better experts on how to get there. So I do think it's sort of how to expand your peripheral vision on what you're trying to accomplish based on your role.
Do you have one that you recommend to us, Julie?
Yeah. It's actually a paper magazine anymore, but Brisk has climate fiction. They have short stories. And one of my annoyances is the term resilient hub. It's like, who would actually want to hang out with a resilient hub? And they just had a short story on resilient community centers and all the things you could do there. It's like, that's, and so now I say, instead of resilient hub, can we just call them resilient community centers? So just like little bite-sized ideas from other people's thinking. Yeah. So Grants, I would start with.
Fantastic, thank you. Alyson shared some questions about exploring our own positionality, and I'm curious what other questions we can be asking of ourselves and our own approaches to this work to take more of an equity and justice informed approach. If you've had experience with asking any of those in any of the projects or what you shared today.
So I want to actually unpack what it means to do equity-centered projects, because we're really trying to do that. And I would say that there's 3 different skills that should be done just as well as engineering, design, permitting, construction. One of them is facilitation, like process facilitation. How do you create a space like today was created beautifully, so people feel like they belong there? They're speaking their primary language. The things around them feel culturally appropriate, depending on who you're trying to reach. So facilitation is really key. Social science is really key. I think public health experts are underused in this to say, how do we know that we have representative voices here so that we really understand people's needs and aspirations? And the third one is community engagement, like meaningful community engagement not just relying on like, can I give stipends to people? Can I give a little bit to a community-based organizer who may not have any skills? They're just in that job and they have other things they're trying to accomplish. But actually building a field where people have some training, primary language skills, cultural competency, they're ideally from those neighborhoods, so that people can use their own networks to say, help us be more creative and be more selfish in what we're trying to accomplish with these projects. Because the people who are worked off, they're not great at dreaming big, because people haven't supported that. So I think there's a real professional field we need to do this work well as we do the other pieces of our work well.
Yeah, I was thinking something similar to point on facilitation and the ability to create safe spaces is so critical. And maybe I'll add that in addition to being able to create, how do you create a safe space for the folks we're working in partnership with, trying to reach, trying to be invited into with, maybe there's also an element that I've learned that is, you know, how do you create a safe space for your project team or your own work to be investigated or reflected on. So when we're asking questions like thinking through positionality, who are the folks who you can do that with in a safe way, so that you're able to improve your own, or I'm able to improve my own work in a real meaningful way. Because I think Kate mentioned that earlier, it's really impossible to do that work totally by yourself. And so that's one question I would also ask.
One question that I think about a lot is being based at a university, of New Hampshire, what access to resources do I have, or what are the opportunities for me to influence change internally in my organization, which is excited to hear Kate share some examples earlier about internal support, processes and improving our own organizations and those opportunities there, so that we all can do our work better in communities, and thinking through what opportunities I have in my role to share resources and power, being based at an entity with some access to resources. So that's just one other question that occupies my mind.
Thank you. So much of this feels like a lot of reflexive work, and I think we heard about reflexivity earlier, so it seems like it's coming up. And I want to also offer Julie, one of the facilitation trainings I did, which we've referenced a lot through cause work, is the Anti-Oppression Resources Training Alliance has been a really fantastic resource. So if someone's interested in exploring or building their own facilitation skills, that's a good place to go. I'm going to pause there because we've run through 10 minutes with some really wonderful knowledge shared. And would invite anyone in the room, if they have questions, raise a hand and we'll do some round robin. Yeah, Becky, just speak up because we don't have a mic for you.
So I was wondering if in the communities that you're working in, whether there's talk coming from the residents about voluntary buyback systems or buyback programs. And like, to a scientist, it can seem like a logical solution to a really persistent flooding problem, but I'm wondering what you're hearing from residents and like whether some of them are asking for that or asking for that.
Yeah, this question comes up a lot, and maybe I'll offer that there have been residents who have sold their properties in the short time that we've been working in Fern, even, or have been contemplating that, simply with flooding playing a role in that decision. So that kind of decision-making, I think, is happening already in the absence of a system that that can buy back the properties and return to the floodplain, because none of the communities in coastal New Hampshire have sort of quite figured out a way to access FEMA grants in a way that that can support that for residents. So in that sense, the demand is there, and in some conversations with neighbors, because that option doesn't exist for them yet, it really isn't a reality that they're, you know, that they can even grapple with. That being said, that we have been doing some work in Hampton to begin to establish the social infrastructure, so that the town can eventually offer home elevation grants and manage relocation to some residents. And we did do survey work to investigate whether residents had demand for that, and the survey results did show, I believe, that 13 residents who responded to the survey are ready to take a buyout option today. So yeah, I think that gives you useful tidbits about how that's coming up, but it is a super nuanced and slow and you know, really challenging conversation in neighborhoods with folks where they may need to deal with that eventually. So we are taking that very slow and sort of being responsive to where they are at this point in time.
I would say the feedback that we've got is hell no. But I mean, we're actually trying to prevent more residential building in flood prone areas. People, you know, it's sort of famous how expensive it is to live in Boston. And so there's such a intense need for housing, especially workforce housing and affordable housing. There's a lot of pressure to build in super flood prone areas. So, and I'm not sure we're gonna prevent that. So, given that we have not been hit with the big one, what feels immediate is housing prices, not catastrophe. And it's just such a bummer to watch a train wreck unfolding.
Go ahead.
And it was really fascinating to hear from Fern and you about, you know, the process of trying to engage with these communities that we've identified as students, very populations. And I was wondering if we could hear more from you about what that process was like for your collaborative again, and how you were able to interact with and build trust with the communities that you're working with. It seems really successful now.
Thank you. So we have about 600,000 people in the watershed. And the first thing we did is look at where are the areas in the watershed that are exposed. And then within those areas, where are the areas that are where people and critical resources are at risk. So we shrank that down from 600,000 people to far fewer. And then the next thing we did was, I'm hoping I'm answering the question. The next thing we did was subcontract with community-based organizations who already had relationships there. And that was our first scaffolding to say, we're not going to either take away your resources by granting up to work where you're going, or, you know, somehow duplicate efforts. But one of the challenges is of our 21 communities, maybe only 3 or 4 have people with the capacity and interest at a nonprofit level to do that work. So that's where we are really trying to build a professional field of people who can contract. Just you can contract on engineering or design or science, but it would be people who live in those areas. It's not people going from place to place, but it's somebody in Chelsea who's from there. We actually get professional level funding to work with us on the neighborhood projects. So that's, in our perfect world, we're able to train up and fund up people from communities to do this work long term. But in the absence of that, about 1/3 of each grant goes to community engagement, so that we have the, and we try to do multiple year grants as often as we can to try to get that patient resources to do projects together. And I think we're getting better at it, but it's not where we need to be.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a philosophical question on balance, which is the speed at which, you know, working at the speed of trust, which is hugely important in this hour, versus the urgency of accelerating impacts that we're seeing today, and grant cycles, infrastructure bill, right? You get 5 years and then you don't know when the next one's gonna be. So I like to, I know, really, you talk about speculative fiction, I like to use that a lot as a tool myself. Just living in two moments at once, and, you know, how do you balance, oh, I need to get this done today versus the long game of building trust and relationships, which is also so.
Sure, I'll start. I think this is one of the challenges that I come back to pretty regularly, that challenges me. And I think there's a concept that Alyson referenced in emergent strategy that Adrian Marie Brown points to that helped me, which is speaking about the concept of fractals, which is, you know, repeating patterns. And that if you're doing, essentially, she uses it to explain that if you're doing good deep work, that it spreads, and you kind of have to trust that, because I'm not going to be able to solve climate resilience in coastal New Hampshire at scale on my own, or even with a team of 9, or, you know, what have you. And so having to make peace with that is really hard. At the same time, there is incredible impact that we can have once we do build those relationships and the places where they already exist. And I mean, Julie's work is such an incredible example of that. So looking for those models and learning from them, I think is super important.
Yeah, just a few small thoughts. You know, I've observed a few local grant programs, such as the coastal programs, which is resilience grants and perhaps PREPA grants, making some, you know, conscious improvements in their process and acknowledging these challenges. You know, they're short-term grants, but wanting to, you know, build that capacity over time. So I think we could look at our existing kind of funding mechanisms and see where there's opportunities for improvement. And yeah, I struggle with that kind of breadth versus depth challenge, and wanting to not spread myself too thin, because I feel like I'm less impactful that way. So it's, you know, a collective challenge, and I think an individual personal challenge that it's something I think a lot of us are grappling with.
I would say, in a sentence, don't get scattershot. Like, if you try to do too much, everything kind of falls apart. And so we are working super intensively in a 76 square mile place, right? And, you know, as you've seen, our grants we're getting grants for the same projects over and over and over. Our working groups have been working together for 6 years. We bring new people in, but, you know, our municipalities, as staff turns over, they tend to pass the baton to the next staff person. We haven't had to do a lot of new recruitment. And I think a lot of it is, we started out by saying, 2 thought leaders who we've had relationships with because we're a solid long-term nonprofit. What do you want? How can we help? And I think that's actually really the key thing that you guys are talking about as well. We didn't come in and say, let us prove something to you. We said, how can we be of service? And when we get too far out ahead of our members, they're like, you're getting too far out ahead of us. That's your idea, not my idea. And we hear it. And it stays, you know, but so I think the idea of bringing up service, bringing resources in, and then staying there and being there for the long term, the trust is kind of there. You know, I think we're at the place where we're really trying to get, you know, hand the car keys over to the state and say, look, could you actually create watershed level caseworkers for the state and fund it as we do schools and roads, because climate is not an add-on, right? So we're trying to shift from, look, this is what it looks like for people who work together at regional scale, to it should not be this rickety.
Super. I'm gonna ask one more question, and we'll close, and it sort of circles back to what was shared this morning. I'm curious how love is showing up in your work.
In our team, I think, and in my colleagues, I think, you know, it's certainly sometimes feels a little countercultural, another term that Kate uses very often, to be expressing and sharing love with colleagues, but I do feel that very deeply with the team that we work with and the safe spaces we created. And I know that's not true in every workplace or every collegial relationship, so I feel very lucky about that. And in the love of place that we're working in, I think being grounded in a place, being able to see the place we're working in and experience it on a day-to-day basis has been really important for me.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen, and great question. See, this shows up in a lot of ways, and one that just comes to mind is just seeing how, you know, the residents, I guess I'm straying from the coastal flood summary, but working with Fern as well, seeing how the residents that we're engaging with just truly love where they live, and feeling so fortunate to share and learn from them about their place, and share my love of my home and my place, and you know, it's just, I think that's where we can find a lot of strength together, so.
We're really focused on cake, like, we're really focused on cake and ice cream circles. And the icebreaker questions like, what do you think about it now? You know, like, we're really trying to recognize people's humanity. Like, anybody who's working on this, we're like, you're not just an automaton. We all, you know, it's a hard moment in life. Let's recognize that, and let's take care of each other. But a lot of it is honestly cake. Like, it's like, I'm very people, you know, and you, during COVID, we had field trips just to have people see each other and to brag about each other's work. But I think it's really like, you know, treating the work we have together like it's a dinner party. Right? You know, just to really deeply focus on humanity first and then the task as part of that.
Love to come have some cake with you.
Cake. There's enough people that I violate.
Yeah. I will say we brought cake not on one but two occasions thanks to bingo. So
Well, please join me in thanking Kirsten and Julian. I'm going to turn this over to Cory to help us do some closing remarks.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm just gonna say a few things to wrap up this conference. And the first is you need to raise your hand in the air first. Go ahead, raise your hand. I promise. To fill out the evaluation survey. Okay, it's really important because as you could see and feel today, the planners take this work very seriously. And in order for the next conference to be even more accessible, meaningful, and relevant, we need that survey filled out. It'll only take 10 minutes. You will see an email in your email box. So please fill that out. The second thing I want to do is just reiterate some of the thank yous that happened this morning. And the first one is to Rodney and to Strawberry Bank. I don't really know if all the participants here know how quickly this group had to pivot to make this happen. And having a host that can be that flexible and welcoming has just been amazing. And what a beautiful place to have this conference. So maybe we could just, do a little round of applause for Strawberry Bank. Thank you. It's my job to thank very sincerely the speakers, the artists, the panelists that made today such a special day. You all did an amazing job. I know we all are thinking things that we didn't think and couldn't have thought of before we walked in the door this morning. And finally, to CAW leadership and to the CAW planning teams that made this happen. They embody the principled, adaptive, and collaborative principles that are a part of their organization in everything they do. And planning this conference is an excellent example. So quick round of applause to everybody who made this happen. And then my final task here is just to wrap up with a couple of reflections from the day. And I just want to thank Kate for really kind of opening this conference in a way that created a mood and a thread that really resonated with me personally, and I hope it resonated with everybody else as well. Because I can't help but sort of think about the growth mindset and think about that in the work that we do in climate, but it's obviously a really personal thing, right? And so when you're thinking personally, how can I grow? you probably have a mental image, right? That's our shortcut. That's our brain's shortcut. And my mental image of growth is a tree, because a tree grows out and it grows up, and then its leaves go in all different directions, and it also goes down deep. And so as I was thinking about the day and my growth mindset, I realized that there were threads of all of these conversations that are going to help me understand how to make that leap. You know, in the growth mindset, there's this fear in the inner circle, and you got to leap beyond that somehow. And so one of the key things was we can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them. You know, that's not a satisfactory response ever for why are we dealing with things this way. So I'm going to challenge myself to think about that tree. Am I growing deep into my community and into the past? Am I growing tall and sort of becoming a better, stronger human so that I can do this work better? Am I growing out and creating sort of a canopy of trust and love and the people around me? You know, how can I grow and leap past that fear boundary? And a big part of that is not doing things the same way that we always do. So I'm going to share a few reflections that came to me today that harken back to Rayanne and Jay's amazing way of saying you can't just present people with new information. You have to give them some examples. You have to give them some what ifs. So here are some of my what ifs for today. But I can't read them without my glasses. So what if I really dug in some hypothetical questions that people in New Hampshire have been wondering for a long time? And the two examples today were the example from Shay. I mean, I've heard people talk about the loss of tax revenue in Hampton for 20 years, and you guys tackled it and figured it out. Another example is the groundwater work. That was a hypothetical concern for a really long time. So what if we all took it upon ourselves to answer some of these hypothetical questions and then support people in using the information? What if we really think about living with water in a different way? And whether that's here in Strawberry Bank and a really innovative solution to your basement, whether it's stormwater and thinking about that differently in our communities, or even, you know, some of the ways that people have thought about incorporating water into their art and into the way that they move forward in their work in communities and at regional scales. So living with water is a really sort of important theme. And what if we really just embrace that? Just embrace living with water. What if I really lean into honoring the past and recognizing that we have been here and we have been interacting with our coast for a really long time, and we should not try to forget. We should not forget. We should honor it, and we should understand how to live within that historical context. And I think that, Dave, your quick slide at the end, where you said we can't be thinking about restoration as backwards, but as forwards, is really kind of like all of our work with water. We can never look backwards. We always have to honor what happened before, recognize what we might be losing, and then figure out how to move forward and carry as much as we can forward about our human experiences into the next phase of our work on climate. What if I got better at using art in all of my conversations about science? I'm just blown away and really inspired by what I see here today. So that's another big what if. Like, what if I go home and I really think about how I'm looking at that, and I want to go home and with my teenagers make friendship bracelets that are like, you know, temperature norms for the year they were born. I'm like so inspired by it. I'm really digging all of the art and the way that we can collect data with photos and the way we can use every type of art that we see around us in a way to really make an impact and connect with people. And as I think about all of these what ifs, the big one that harkens back to sort of the themes of the day is, what if I tried to break out of that bubble of fear by combining knowledge that I didn't have before with perspectives that I didn't have before and relationships that I didn't have before, to act with love and hope in a way that I couldn't before. And so for me, that's like the big takeaway. And I think that I'm framing it that way because we care about the work that we do on climate resiliency, because we care about ourselves, each other, and nature, to go back to that trinity that Alyson talked about this morning. And this is really corny and embarrassing, but I'm going to admit it, that when we were asked to write down our why of why we're here, before she said write with your left hand, what I wrote, the only thing I had time to write, was make it better. And then I tried to use my left hand to describe what I meant by that. And John is sitting next to my card, and he can probably see that you can't read it. But it's like, that is inside of us all. That is like why we do the work we do. That is why we want to be better to each other. That's why we want nature to get better. It's like, we want to make it better. And I just think that that is like, if there was a religion, you know, in this room, it's that we want to see things evolve, and we want things to get better. And for me, it's been like a real personal journey to recognize that that is never going to be a linear path. It is always going to be a meander. And just like those pictures of the Mystic River, we have got to give ourselves space for that meander. And so I am incredibly grateful for CAW and for creating a conference that gave us new knowledge and new relationships and new perspectives, but also created that space for the meander. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the CAW organizers. This was just an amazing day. Thank you.